All right, welcome to the Media Gel podcast. We're going to be talking about programmatic advertising today. We have three gentlemen with us. Want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Jake Lickey. I'm the CEO of Media Gel.
I'm Ted Montanus. I'm the Director of Business Development at Smart Ad Server.
And I'm Sam Holman, the Chief Digital Officer at Inlight.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's start from the top.
So if we forgot about you, you didn't introduce yourself.
My name is Guillermo Bravo. I am the host tonight, the Chief Evangelist here at Media Gel.
Perfect. All right.
And we're going to talk about programmatic advertising. We're just having a little bit of debate on whether we should call it display ads or something else. So, Sam, you want to take it? What's your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, well, tying that into the subject at hand, right? Cannabis and programmatic advertising.
Yeah.
I think the industry, being cannabis-specific, is very much geared towards display. But we were just having a conversation about this a few minutes ago at the table over here, and I personally think with a lot of the consolidation happening, saturation that really started in California is now starting to migrate west. There's going to be a large emphasis on brands. And with that, given that brands are really at its core a CPG product, I personally think that it's not just display anymore. It's also video and other forms of advertising.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of what we were talking about, the words that we use, right? We've worked, I know the three of us have worked in that tech for a long time, and it has its own vernacular, and sometimes people use the same word meaning different things, right? So we've kind of tried to use display as the general category, like display, and then putting video and native under that so that we can separate it from like search, right? So paid search and organic. So we just bucket everything under display, but many people would think of display as just banners, right? That's display, video is not display. And we're already not using the same words in the ad tech industry, and then now we're bringing this to the cannabis industry, which is just going to create further confusion, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and there probably needs to be a little bit more consistency, across the board, just in how people are talking about the idea of program.
No longer are the days, where you call somebody and you're dropping off reels and then tapes and plugging them in and stuff. And advertising is caught up with technology, and that television advertising is now bought programmatically. We talk about programmatic, and then display to mean, in this sense, it's displayed to you. It's visual, but it can be everything. And for somebody in ad tech, that's confusing. And then we always have to take it in advertising like one step further and make it more confusing. You go to shows and you hear, the same buzzwords and stuff and topics, and those always give a rise to a bunch of different companies. There's viewability, transparency, and then now we have a lot more regulations and buzzwords and blockchain and so around data, and data's importance. But for the cannabis industry, that is still in its infancy when it comes to, let's say, the more advanced display ads at this topic, that we can almost just call it, instead of paid search or social, that it's advanced advertising. Because
or digital.
It's digital. Because we're including, not just video and display, and you have in-app, mobile web, desktop, and now we're going to be adding in connected TV and streaming services. And there's going to be a lot of overlap too with esports and e-gaming and streaming and integrations into that, because we're already seeing programmatic, as engulf the advertising's traditional brick and mortar, which is digital displays. You can buy a video ad, a digital display, a mobile ad, and they can be rich media. And the next is with the streaming. We're gonna have in-game.
So it's now since we're at Buzz, rich media. What is rich media? Is it HTML5, creative, right?
Yeah, just send me your assets back.
It's like a multi-layer Venn diagram, right?
And that's why it's funny you mentioned in-store display. For us at Enlighten, at least, we have our entire in-store network. And we actually categorize it as digital out of home, and then our programmatic platform, it's digital so that we don't confuse people, even though they can be bought programmatically, and technically they're both digital display mediums.
Yeah, you've got your display network, and that's running mostly video, right? Like, is there like still interstitials that happen at all? Or
Yeah, the in-store network, we can take static videos too. We recommend that people run 15-second spots, 30-second spots. You know, there's been a ton of studies the last 2 years or so where video really has a higher conversion rate. So that's kind of goes that route. But a lot of marketers in the cannabis ecosystem just can't afford to make video at this point in time.
That's the thing.
It's another thing we're talking about.
That we found, we with a lot of brands and retailers we work with, we actually have, you've got your display network, but we've got publishers on connected TV, that are, Hulu's not there yet, but like Sony, Crackle, and some of the other, kind of second tier CTV channels, they'll take cannabis ads. But the brands don't, for the most part, have them yet, right? Because they haven't been aware that they could even get on a living room television.
That's a constant conversation that we're having on a daily and a weekly basis. And connected TV and video constantly comes up. And I think it's one, the price point that scares people. And then two, it's, I can't run ads on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, any of the social platforms, big platforms everybody's used to. So like, that means I can't do digital advertising. And that's just not accurate.
So the pricing, what's the difference in regular video ads versus video CPM?
It's a lot more expensive. Video ads have a much higher CPM. It's a much more activated.
So let's for words, CPM. What is CPM? Because that's common for us. We know what that means, and many marketers do, but not everyone. Right. So that's your cost per 1,000 impressions, cost per mil, which is not a million, it's 1,000. But the question remains. The pricing, like for your network, you've got your in-display network, which is pretty like special inventory. So I imagine that CPM is high, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly comparable to most digital out-of-home mediums. We're fortunate we own that inventory, so we can control the pricing. We're getting 100% profit on that. So, I have flexibility depending on who the partner is and what they're trying to communicate and what their dedication is going to be to us long term, right? For us, and I'm sure you guys are dealing with this on a daily basis too. We want to create long-term partnerships. It's not about, hey, we're just going to throw this thing called programmatic at you and this thing called digital out of home with you. You guys can try it, and then we never want to hear about it again. We want to educate cannabis marketers that this is a tool or a solution that they should be using. In fact, it's a tool or a solution that they should be using pretty much every day of the year as support for every other marketing mechanism that they've been activating. It's the foundation to hit cannabis consumers, cannabis intenders, what we call the canna curious. I think you guys call something similar. And having that always on approach where you can reach a mass audience, then ultimately with all of the other things that you have in market, that's how you create that funnel that's going to ultimately let programmatic really work for you, where you're going to drive that outcome you're looking for.
Let's define what programmatic advertising is.
I'll
take that.
And it's kind of, and to your point too, I guess I'll get to that with programmatic, is that in its simplest form, it's real-time bidding on advertising or ad inventory and location. And it's simple supply and demand, but it's automated and it happens much real time. All of us can log onto a website, same website.
Like the stock market.
Yes.
Just very good.
So, and if you ever find yourself at a dinner table and you have always that one aunt that's, oh, what do you do? And so I call this my Carol speech on what programmatic advertising is to, especially to marketers that have done so much in marketing. This is still scary to them, and what we've heard from a lot of people. And the easiest way to describe it is yes, like the stock. On one end, you would buy shares of a company, and that company in this case in programmatic is a publisher, and you are buying shares of their advertising. You're buying ad location. And on the other end, you have advertisers or a brand that want to buy and have a need for that. And there's many ways to do it. I mean, a little bit different because there's a lot of self-serve, but we have seen the rise of the Robin Hoods of the world. But traditionally, you would go to, a brokerage. You would go to a bank and they would invest. You Schwab, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, they build your portfolio. And in this case, those are advertising agencies. And like those financial institutions that I named, in programmatic, they're named Omnicom, IPG, Publicis, WPP, those old traditional ad houses that have armies of programmatic traders. And you buy shares, you can day trade, but in programmatic, you're buying an impression. So you're buying that ad space, and it can be anything from video display, digital out of home, advanced TV, consoles, audio, all of that now. Yeah. And you're buying it and you're in a competition, and it goes to the highest bidder. Now there's some variations.
That's the second highest bidder.
Yes, yeah. Let's keep it above. Yeah, let's not go to the Wonderland just yet. And that happens within a millisecond. So that ad call goes out, brand bids on it, and what they're bidding on is a CPM, and that's basically what they feel comfortable in paying for this spot. Now there's a floor price, and that's the lowest that publisher will take. And then
use the buy it now price.
Yes, that is the buy it now. Yeah, if nobody else wants it, there's a lot of people that will buy that one. And where our business gets complicated, where the buzzwords come in, where the congressional hearings and and all of this nonsense that has scared people away from real digital programmatic is what happens in between that, and how we value that impression. And that is all data driven, because inventory might cost $1, but the person that's logging on that pre-bid is your ideal customer. So you might be willing to pay $20 for them.
They've got something like in their cart that they just haven't checked out on.
Yes.
Right? That customer's worth so much more than the other billion impressions that are in the same hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically advertising now is a large scale marketplace.
And in the cannabis industry, talking about data, I think one of the things to point out, we were talking about price earlier, is and how that scares away a lot of cannabis marketers. It's, hey, you're buying a very hyper targeted audience, and until that audience is the mass audience in this country, it's going to be expensive to buy that audience. So that's what you're paying for. You can either go out and you cannot buy that cannabis audience and blanket target people that are 21 plus, so you're fighting by all the regulations. And sure, you may hit your consumer and you'll probably drive some sales. But what you really want to do is target that cannabis consumer that is in a dispensary, that made a purchase, that checked out a website that aligns with your brand's lifestyle. And that's the audience that you should be buying. That's what you're paying for. And that's why it's going to cost $20 if it's video, or $8 or $9 if it's a display ad, although let's categorize display as a banner ad.
Yeah. And there's, when you're talking about dollar, you're talking about for 1,000. Right?
Yeah, 1,000.
So what would a typical campaign cost? Like a minimum?
Actually, I was going to weigh on this because you were talking about price, and you're asking a question, how much is it? And the scale can be whatever. You could spend $100, you could spend $1 million. And I think what many people get hung up with when you start talking about video or rich media is there is a differential in the price. Like video could be 20. If you're on connected TV, like linear, digital, that could be like $40, right? But it's priced like that for a reason, right? And so I think a lot of people get hung up on like the CPM pricing versus their budget, because you can spend the same amount of money on either thing, right? Is your budget $1,000? Is it $10,000? That's fine. If you're doing something that's a $10 CPM versus 20, you'll have half the impressions, but the value is usually priced in, and the market does that. Like, we don't control the pricing. So the market does that. And so, connected TV video is 4 times the cost of like very simple display, but you have a 96% view rate. Versus being one ad out of 20 on a page.
Right? And you basically just proved out the Aunt Carol's speech I just gave about the stock market, because you'll go to one of these big institutions and they'll say, yeah, we're gonna, you'll buy, bonds, or, put it in your 401k. You can either just do that and just have it, slowly chug along for 40 years. And you get your portfolio, it's a pie chart. We have this invested in that. But it's the same thing with your media. So if you have $1 million spent, you have $1 million spent. And you could buy into, a mutual fund that is going to return this, or you could buy single, more risky stuff but the stuff that that is going to be consistent and drive is much more expensive than maybe taking a gamble on these, mass scalable shares that you're buying in, whether it be penny stocks, if you're buying, really crap inventory. And that goes back to what a lot of them were talking about before about your media mix. But I have a question for you two, which is there's a big difference I'm starting to see in cannabis of the top and everybody else. And video being expensive to produce. And also if you're a local dispensary, or you met two guys, it was just two drivers, they're building, this brand of delivery, and they just would want to target this one county, that they can't do video yet. So is there going to become a gap between let's say the top, 5-10% of cannabis companies and brands that are investing in video and they're going to leave everybody behind because their product is already nationwide. So then they control the video market.
Well, I think that's fair, especially in an industry where there are really a handful of players that are actually spending enough to make a difference.
Yeah.
Right. And this kind of goes into what Guillermo was talking about before. He was asking about what does it actually cost?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we'll take any budget. We'll give a recommendation. Our team is excellent about being transparent and trying to guide buyers through the process. And we tell them that, sure, you want to spend $1,000, it's fine, but it's probably not going to move the needle for you. You get a few impressions, you get in front of a few people, maybe one person, two people actually recognize your brand. On average, we're seeing brands, enter the digital advertising programmatic market at $5,000 to $10,000 a month, and they're maybe comfortable spending for about 3 months. And if you can't prove out a return on investment in that period of time, they get scared.
Yeah.
And then you have everybody else, these few larger brands, right? It's not really everybody else. The MSOs, a few select brands that aren't owned by an MSO that are distributing, that are comfortable spending 6 figures, 7 figures a year to really drive that outcome. And that's where they can really afford that type of inventory that's going to drive the needle. And especially when you're hyper targeted, be able to at least drive enough scale for you where it's going to make an impact. Because in this industry, as we know, scale can be an issue.
Yeah, it has been. It actually is much less of an issue for us now on, display programmatic that we're doing. And that's largely thanks to Smart, right? And I was talking to Ted last month and I just wanted to get the broad numbers. In general, unless we're in like a little tiny market and someone wants to do something hyper targeted, we don't usually have a problem with Phil being, being able to buy all the impressions that you want. Yeah. But what was the number you gave me? It was like in the US, like 40 billion?
Yeah, probably 40, maybe a little bit more now, but 40 billion monthly ad auctions for just the highest of the regular, like THC.
Explicitly approved for cannabis, meaning every single impression that would be bought is going to go through a deal ID, a connection that says this is cannabis, and the publisher has been told and approved that for cannabis.
Right? It's pretty unbelievable to think about that, right? 40 billion. I mean, we first met about 2 years ago. We were talking about that. There was nowhere close to that. It's just amazing over 2 years where the market has come.
Well, a lot of it is grown because we've been doing this for a while now, right? And we've proven that we have good advertisers. We understand brand safety. We understand the compliance, and it's a new revenue source. And pubs have had a couple of bad decades in terms of revenue, right? They've been beaten up by this programmatic thing that's happened, and so having a new industry of advertisers, there's trepidation, but once we prove ourselves, they like the dollars.
And I think the publishers are getting on board quicker.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right.
very much so, especially maybe not with THC, because there is going to be a lot that can't do that, or, it just doesn't fit into, their brand. And on the CBD side and a lot of the other products, and there's still going to be a lot that are going to do THC side, and as that market develops, but they're going to be interested in it. And now we're seeing them start to accept it, but we're seeing some start to report back on it and produce content because it's becoming interesting to them.
Yeah.
There was an article that just came out in Digiday, which is very traditional advertising institution and publishing. And something about cannabis and the business insiders of the world. There's
There's a magazine or something this morning. I didn't read the article yet, but I saw it. It was on the cover too.
Yeah. CNN has something on the 19th. I saw a little ad for it. It's weed, but it's just about the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and speaking of like big activations that were like CBDMD, I mean, I don't know, maybe people are golf fans, but if you watched the US Open this year, in between the broadcast, they had a large, branded video segment with Bubba Watson. And then they had, book-ended creative, which is a 30-second, 60-second ad spot. And that was aired on NBC and the streaming services.
I think a really good prime example was Major League Sports, right? And this is kind of taking a little bit away from digital advertising. I don't know if you guys saw it. This summer, Major League Baseball had their All-Star game in Colorado. It was the first time a major sports league had a event, meaning a pillar event, All-Star game, that type of thing, in a legal cannabis market.
Oh, interesting.
And there were a lot of brands that actually activated. Lana Gummies did a whole thing around the golden ticket to give away All-Star tickets to Major League Baseball. It's just a great example of tying into something organically, maybe not necessarily working directly with the league, but I'm pretty sure they're doing it in Colorado, right around the stadium. Major League Baseball had to have known about it and at least give it there somewhat. Okay, yeah, we'll let it slide. Yeah, that's a good example in my mind of big time sports and that type of thing really starting to ease, and we're now starting to see where the industry's go.
Yeah, and the content is really important too, because we do a lot of contextual targeting, and it's a contextual targeting.
What is contextual targeting? Let's use the words.
Okay, yeah. So contextual targeting is when you insert ads or you target media on a specific topic. So the content, whether it's written or visual, is of a certain category. And in our business, we usually our benchmark for categorization is given to us by the IAB, and there's 2 levels of it. And
what is the IAB?
so it's traditional.
It's the internet advertising bureau, right?
Yeah, and I guess in the South it'd be like the S&P.
Yeah, so it's a standards body that all the leading companies are part of. It sets standards, and so there are categories. When we're talking about bidding on impressions, one of the pieces of data you get as a buyer from a publisher is what category it is, right? So
yeah, and there's 2 levels, and the first level is very rigid. Like you have entertainment, lifestyle, news, sports,
categories.
Yeah, the matrix, and then maybe a subcategory. But that translates to like what they're categorizing the ads are. That doesn't translate to who the consumer is. Because entertainment can be celebrity gossip and your Real Housewife watcher, but entertainment can also be your comic book nerd that is real into Marvel and DC, and they do not buy the same products. So now contextual advertising at Skiddo and adding in AI, let's not get
just like there.
Sorry. You can be around relevant content, and cannabis content has usually been, you look it up and feel like Britannica or Encyclopedia, and it's like CBD will make you feel like this, and that's not where you want your ad to be. You want it to be around something that's talking about it. Like you're Adidas and you're selling a soccer boot, you want to be around Champions League content.
Right, but that content, like the old sort of older way of doing it was like, I want to target soccer or football site. But there may be someone who has a personal blog that normally writes about, lasagna but they have something they wrote that's about that particular thing that is relevant, right? And so that's where the semantic targeting comes in. Like it's similar to AdWords a little bit, right? In the sense that you're now talking about like what is the person looking for, what is their engagement, and it is more detailed than the particular website or category, right?
And yeah, this is going to get scary for a second potentially, but this is becoming ever more important, or increasingly more important, excuse me, right? In a world where the IDFA is going away.
Yeah,
Right?
well,
Apple
what's the IDFA?
14's update. It's the
Earmuffs,
ID,
earmuffs.
the ID for advertisers in Apple on
For the
Apple
phone,
devices
yeah.
for your mobile device. And then at the end of next year, the cookie in Google Chrome is going away. The cookie is basically this little piece of code that follows you around from website to website to website that historically marketers have used to place advertisements, knowing that you went to that website.
Yeah, where you've been online.
Yeah, and with that going away, contextual advertising is going to become extremely important.
Right.
What was it, Bob Barker, after the Price is Right, he would say like spay and neuter your dogs. Like, that was like his tagline. I guess like now, the next generation will be like, remember to clear your cache and cookies.
Yeah.
And so,
Talking about Bob Barker, all I'm thinking about is Happy Gilmore. But
Yes.
but it's the same. I mean, that's how they follow you along. But yeah, contextual is kind of the next big thing, and it's a cookieless solution. And personally, my opinion on it is that it's, saying back, it's a call to action back to marketers to, I don't know, be marketers again, be creative again, and think of where your
content is king.
Content, it has always been king.
Or in this case, context.
Context.
Okay.
I like that.
And next on, then we'll get into the how the AI looks at it, but it's a very good example of somebody writes an article not of their normal content.
Yeah, then what's the process from kind of beginning to end on the creating a campaign, tracking the campaign, and
I feel like we need a whole nother episode.
all right, you want to do that? High level.
High level, I mean, I would say that the important part is the beginning, which gets forgotten a lot, which is what is your marketing goal and what is your the campaign. And a lot of people think, oh, if you do an ad campaign, that means I've got a banner ad and I'm going to serve people. But if you go back in advertising, a campaign is like a whole story, like that you're going to tell to consumers about your product. You need to figure out who they are, like who you're going to serve the ads to. But advertising, there's something called shared value, right? There needs to be something that you do with the consumer where you're giving them something that they're interested in, whether that is a brand identity or education or whatever. And then in exchange, they buy the product, right? People skip over that a lot now. They're just like, I'm going to make ads. But what are the ads doing? Like, what are you trying to tell? What is the story? And what is the outcome other than I want people to buy things?
Right. It brings that full circle right back to video that we were talking about earlier, because especially again in the CPG world, that's the clearest narrative to being able to tell your story.
Yeah, and that's one thing that comes up a lot in a lot of the cannabis shows that I've been at, where perception on cannabis is important, and now when you come with video, how are you going to deliver that? And it's ever more important of delivering that message in a video form.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break, then we'll continue back and talk a little bit more about all that.
Enjoy this message from our sponsors.
Remember to clear your cache and cookies.
All right, well, continuing on, let's talk a little bit about an actual campaign and a case study that we want to look at, and someone in the industry that's really done a great job, with the integrated marketing strategy.
Okay, let's see. So, I now have to think about what I can and can't say in terms of names. Well, let's not use names, right?
Okay.
We'll just say that we have.
I'm going to use a name.
Or
I'm
already thinking about it.
I'm also biased though, so.
Oh, not a campaign we're running, just a campaign in general. And all of advertising? That's a broad
No,
question.
cannabis.
Um,
Someone that's doing a good job at executing on a display campaign.
on display campaigns. Let's see here. We have Yeah, I got it.
Just saying, you wanna go?
Yeah, and like I said, I'm gonna be biased because I have a little skin in this game, but Holistic Industries and their suite of brands. Retail's a little bit different. I think it's just its own beast, but they have the new Jerry Garcia brand, which just launched last year. And they have 2 other brands, Dewdrops and Strain, all different messaging, all different lifestyle segments. Obviously, everybody knows who Jerry Garcia is, but they do a really good job. They really started with display, but they're spending enough money to be able to make an impact and actually be able to start to see some outcomes and garner some data and intelligence about who their audience is. And I know when I was looking at their end of the year reporting, which we just got back, I was actually shocked to see some of the data segments that are coming back. That's the beauty of programmatic, right? That you can get all of these insights and continue to refine who your customer is and target that customer and learn things that probably didn't know and it might surprise you.
Yeah.
And when you are talking about data segments, are you talking about on the targeting side or just on the success side of who's buying and how they went through the funnel?
So I think it's a combination of both, right? In terms of actually using that data, just in general, that's a really difficult hurdle to get over for a lot of people in this industry. You have the obvious, GDPR, California consumer privacy, which makes people out of this industry extremely concerned. And I think you guys will all agree, it took 10, 15 years for most major advertisers to get really comfortable with actually using the point of sale data to be able to better target their consumers and to be able to understand who their consumers are and make various different profiles of who they are, be able to actually execute on that. And then there's some brands who you could say were either afraid to use that data or they were sitting on so much of it that they decided to create their own platform, CVS, right?
Yes, but I know from personal experience is that a similar, let's just call it a similar company, of their size, didn't do a good job about that because their whole customer care, their loyalty program, and you had it under keychain and you would go. When you would sign up for that, it was the teller when you would check out. Oh, do you want to sign up? And that person was just barely entering in a lot of that information. So they had all of this years and years of fragmented data. Maybe they had a phone number and an old AOL email or something. And it wasn't complete. And now they're realizing shoot, because with everything that we mentioned on the last one that's going away, cookies and IDFA, that we're now building identity graphs. And
that's why first party data is using that loyalty information. So
first party data, what does that mean?
First party data is data that is directly from the consumer, typically in the form of some loyalty data. You can go and acquire that in many different ways. Mailers, someone that's coming in, incentivizing them, whatever. But essentially, it's typically a person's name, address, birthday, some kind of personal identifier. And you hear the word personal identifier, and all of a sudden you probably get freaked out. Oh, wait, that person has my name. They know where I live. They're targeting me. In the world of advertising, we were talking before about California consumer privacy and GDPR. It's mandatory that any platform like ours has to work with an intermediary or bring on certain types of technology to do what's called hashing, which is basically anonymizing that information so that we can actually use it, and then essentially putting it in a group so that we don't know who that individual is.
Yeah, we always don't just want to target you. You're not important to us, but you at scale is always important. And it's funny with data and that people don't realize, I don't want to use my data. And going back to my Aunt Carol speech, it's that I say to people, it's oh, so when you're in the bar and you hold your phone up and you go, see, I told you it was Katy Perry. I knew it. And that's not how they make money. They don't make money off of you not knowing who's singing the song. It's the data. Your phone is pinged. They have that device. They know, the location, following around there, building a profile, the type of music that you like. Now it's integrated into the different music streaming platforms. But yeah, their core business is you just holding it up and being see, I told you this was Drake. Yeah, it's the collection of data, but you have opted into getting that. And that's one of the knocks against Facebook. Maybe all this stuff is that when you sign up for something, it's impossible to understand. And that's part of what a lot of legislation is going to say. No, it has to be easy, but what are you doing with it? And this is what we're doing. And that linkage of what has been so confusing, because you said the financial transaction data, that's a very murky business. Cannabis is very different because it started with POS data because of regulations. It started with that. It actually was gonna pay. It's going to pay off for them in the long run. But bank data, when you sign those bank for debit, credit card, and everything, like you don't see that little one line that says, you know, we might use it for, you know, if you sign up for the loyalty program, we might use it for marketing purposes.
This is something that you know a lot about
Yes.
background.
Yeah. So it's murky at best.
And on the first party data thing, the other thing that happens, and you know, this is dependent on the brand or the retailer or whoever it is, it creates an opportunity to have a one-on-one relationship with the consumer. It's sort of upon the brand to decide how they're going to present, you know, the cookie acceptance or whatever that portion is. But if it is done in a clear way, you can explain what it is that you're doing with the information, and then you have an agreement between the brand and the consumer that bypasses all these issues around third-party data and cookies and maids, because that consumer has said, "I like your brand, and I want to hear from you."
What's it made, by the way?
Oh man, see, yeah, maybe. See, it's a mobile advertiser ID, right? So there's a few terms. So we'll get into that. There's IDFA, ID for advertiser, which is the older one. And then there was AAID, Android advertiser ID. Yeah, commonly referred to as MAIDs, and these are it's basically the serial number of your phone. Now, Apple has they just took a chainsaw to the whole thing, right? Like we talked about, we talked about what Google and Facebook are doing in terms of like,
Live look at Mark's like,
Yeah.
damn you.
they're like, you know, we're not doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Yeah. They're like,
We know.
it's difficult for us to explain to you what we are or are not going to do with your data, so we're just going to let you just put the red button on all of it, right? And I see it now, and yeah, as even someone who has worked in advertising data for a long time, little thing pops up on my iPhone, and it's like ask app not to track, or the other thing you're like, what? Just no, press no on that. I mean,
Well, the way that they got away with it for so long is you hit no and then your app didn't function the way that you wanted it to function. So then you went back and you opted in,
yeah,
which now they're starting to shy away from, which I think is a good thing.
But as far as like running these campaigns, what are some examples of places that ask you to show?
well, now, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, we have, we have access to, like, I think the big numbers, like 45,000 hubs, but many of those are small hubs, right? So it's more like in the, 5,000 to 10,000 hubs of, quality content. And, we're at the point now where the larger media companies are accepting cannabis. If you're a company that can display, I shouldn't use the word display, demonstrate that you understand the compliance and all of that, then we can now run ads on, like Rolling Stone and First Properties, SF Gate. I live there, so I'm using that as an example. But newspapers and brands that I think is where, circling back to what you're saying, it's going to become a brand game. And as a new brand, being able to put your brand just right under Rolling Stone or Variety, there's a lot of value to that, right, for consumers, because you're getting validation.
Yeah, and for cannabis, it's a seat at the table now. Like you, in programmatic, like we explained, it's a competition, and you value who your customer is. And there will still be the Procter Gambles and Progressives and Home Depots that come in and will outbid because they pay for a ton of data. And like we said this before, you get what you pay for, but you still have the same seat at that table as they do to bid on that media in real time.
Yep, that's true.
And that hitting for a brand, them understanding like, oh, okay, like,
Well, I think we should also clarify too, is the one thing in the cannabis industry, at least up until this point, is there really hasn't been a platform that allows buyers to actually control that. So I think the one thing that marketers, especially cannabis marketers, should really understand is that they can control their buying mechanism. audience. They just need to understand what they're getting. And they need to work with the platforms that they're choosing to work with to effectively buy that media, right? So you may quote them a $7 eCPM, which is an estimated CPM.
Or effective.
Or effective, however you decide to go about it, to buy that media, but you can also be upfront with your buyer and say to them, yeah, I want to try and hit that, but if inventory is going up, the price that inventory is going up, and I want a good quality audience, and I want that data, sure, go ahead and bid at $15 or whatever that price may be. Don't just go and bid on the $7 or less to try and get to that effective CPM inventory, because it's crappy inventory. It's not what my audience is.
Yeah, but you can still have that large pool.
Yeah.
Like you want to keep your content as open as possible if you're going with a data-driven strategy. Because I've seen this a lot more often times. It's like, we want to go heavy data, this and that, and here's our whitelist. We only want to run on ESPN and
5 publishers.
Yeah, 5, and you're like, come on. And that might not be what your consumer is, because all of a sudden you might realize like, oh, they read this website.
Oh yeah,
okay.
we learn a lot of
Yeah.
interesting things on, because we'll run prospecting campaigns across tens of thousands of apps and pubs. And in different regions, there's specific clubs that drive sales for cannabis brands that we would have not predicted.
Yes.
Grinders great.
Yes.
They kill for us.
A friend of cannabis, I will say.
And it's funny, right? Because there are definitely brands that look at that domain level report and see that, and they're like, I don't want to be there.
Oh,
Yeah, well, why don't you want to be there? Your CTR is 1.45. That's your click-through rate.
Yeah.
And
Percent.
yeah, it's percentage, and anything above 1 is really good.
Yes. Yeah.
So if it's really good, your audience is there. So why wouldn't you want to buy that?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're really trying to do, and I think you guys are too, is being transparent in that process, right? Really showing people, hey, these are all the places.
Yeah, for every
That's
impression
everything.
that we have, for every conversion, it's what when it was served,
We
what
want
kind
to
of device.
understand
Well, both of you have it, is you can, through Smart, one of the big things that we came out with is it's a UI, it's called Smart Buyer Connect. It's a free UI for any buyer that wants to get up there. It's technology, it's built on our ad server, built on our exchange. We're a large global exchange, and you can go in and curate these deals. And the saying is like, if you're going to go heavy data, content is open. Keep it as broad as possible to let what you're paying for do its job. Or if you want to go the contextual route and pick. But what the platform does is it says, okay, I want to add in these cities, and I want to buy these formats. I want, display.
Formats being ad sizes.
Yes, ad sizes on the page, display, in these areas. And this is before you add data. You can then see a drop down of all the publishers in that category. And when we say publishers, a publisher can have, it's not a website. Like a Hearst, a Condé Nast, some of these bigger guys have hundreds of websites, and most publishers have tons of. You would be surprised at the publisher name, and then when you say what a couple of their domains are, you're like, oh, yeah, that I know. There's a difference between those.
Like Penske, like
Yes.
nobody knows what Penske is, but you know Rolling Stone.
Yes,
and variety.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you will see underneath, you will see, those domains. Pick and choose those and see what those prices are, because they'll all be different. And that way you go like, yeah, if I'll sprinkle a little data on, and if it's somebody that's, key and variety comes up, I know it's expensive, but if that person's there, pay that much. But I will take the rest of it.
And for that story, when you say sprinkle some data on there, what is that? Again, let's circle it back, because it's a complex topic. You've talked about everything else, but what does sprinkling data mean in that context?
Oh, yeah, and
Filtering?
well, I don't want to be probabilistic about it. I want to be determined.
Okay, good.
No, and I'm not explaining that one.
So I think, right, maybe what you're referring to is, you mentioned Penske and Rolling Stone, right?
Yeah.
And go back to the Garcia brand, just using that as an example, you're targeting music fans, right? So that's a data layer that you can add on. So is that what you're referencing?
Yes.
Music enthusiasts.
Yes, well, and obviously with cannabis, we'll have to add on,
And
an
then,
edge.
what kind of music? Because there's many music fans that are not necessarily into it.
Yeah, so generally what you can do when you're building a deal, like the top data that you would look for is you can have, behavioral, you can have location, you can have, let's call it.
It's like a
advanced
recipe. It
contextual.
feels like a recipe.
Yeah, or like you're ordering on, Chipotle or something, and you're picking and choosing the things you want. That's kind of what, online. And some of the other data you can add in is, something we haven't talked about that should be very important to brands and brand safety. That is a whole other scary side of, the
Brand safety.
police of our
Before we get into
business.
brand safety, I think we need to take a step back and just talk about how Ted compared ad tech to Chipotle.
That's pretty.
I compare it to- yes,
I mean,
pretty
impressive.
yeah, it makes sense. You got they're like guacamole, that's probably video, it's more expensive, it increases like 25%.
Yeah, no, it's because it's good stuff. No walks extra, right? And then you'll see that CPM, you're like,
How much extra?
Well, that's that really hyper targeted audience that you're trying
oh,
to.
yeah, that is like,
Yes, that's rich.
yes, it's that's the good stuff. Yeah, double meat is like, Nielsen said.
Yes, red hair, freckles, left-handed, that type of situation.
Yeah, so you can add in a lot of these, and you should, with us, you can see what those prices are tacked on to what the publisher gets. And if you're on a platform that doesn't show you that stuff, run away.
To go somewhere else.
Yeah, please go somewhere else.
And that's one of the most frustrating things to me in this industry, when I got started in this industry, is just hearing all the horror stories about platforms that were acting like digital ad tech platforms of the AOL era and the AOL era, the .com era. Twice I did that. Carpet bombing, black box, and that's not okay.
No,
You should know how your dollars are being spent.
yeah, and that's where it's important. Viewability, brand safety, transparency.
Oh, you said brand safety.
Yes.
We'll dig into that. What is brand safety? Pretty
Yeah, well, they're underneath it. Each,
Just for cannabis.
yeah, you have the ad verification side of things, viewability, the request for transparency, but also that's a for-profit business too. So that tacks on to that CPM. So that $10 CPM that you have the publishing cost, the data cost, we kind of call it ad tech tax. And there's ways that you can audit that and cut out some of those things by working with more trusted partners that are transparent by nature. And once you understand what you're doing more, you'll know what to look for, and that will help save costs for you. But brand safety is a different category. When we were talking about semantic and contextual targeting, that came back in digital. It's always been important in digital, but the technology around it was built for brand safety, to target away from certain content. I don't want to be on heavily political articles or news, or I don't want to be on something talking about this, and that things for you to be away with. It was a very defensive strategy, and now we're using contextual targeting as an offensive strategy. But for cannabis brands, brand safety is very important, and not just verifying the age of the ad that you're sending or deploying to somebody. But it's something that every brand should be thinking about in their digital investment strategies.
Thinking about this, making sure that it's built into the platform that they're using.
Yes.
And the regulatory aspect should be built in as well.
Mhm.
And I'll take it even one step further, and this is something that's just really come up recently with us. And maybe it's the time of the year, maybe it's the category, but in addition to just having that layer in there, I've started to recommend to our buyers that they even go out and partner with a company like a double verifier and Integral Ad Science and wrap their tags so that we can actually get the domain level reporting to see where the fraudulent traffic is coming from to get rid of it. And if you have to pay an extra few $1,000 for it, it's worth it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ad tech companies out there that do a lot with the pricing and it's not just the advertiser, right? It's always not just about the advertiser. We mentioned this a little bit. It is publishers, and we talk so much about cannabis brands and the brands, and we get the brands awards and stuff, but it's also the content too. And the next big venture and something in the future for cannabis is cannabis content that that will help drive the identity of the brand. And if you're a sports brand, you advertise on sports, like that's your content, that's your nature. So we need more cannabis content, and there's brand safety, there's very strong transparency issues for publishers themselves. Like they don't have a lot of control. you know, on some of the bigger platforms, their data is sold without their knowledge too. And your data as an advertiser or a brand can also be sold in the wrong way too. So yeah, going out and getting one of those partners, it's, you know, it's car insurance, it's health insurance. It's not something that you're going to be, you know, upset that you paid for. It gives you peace of mind. But it is so important too, because it only takes one tweet. It only takes one person. We've all heard the story about the father that got upset and went into the Target or whatever, because his daughter was getting targeted these ads, and, you know, and it came out to be true. It's probably just a tall tale legend, and we all get told to like be responsible with data. But like I said, it only takes one tweet, one person to have a problem with your brand about the content that you were at, or how the ad was used to redirect an auto or something that even more malicious, that can really hurt your brand's perception.
Yeah, and especially with cannabis, where you've got some very serious age implications, right? You can't do household retargeting in cannabis because you don't know what that household is like, and there's a high likelihood that there's kids in the house, right? So you can't just,
People are afraid to connect with TV.
I'm just gonna mention that, yeah, because you don't like. We've talked about doing dynamic ads on advanced TV that are clickable, that maybe at some point you would be able to order from a delivery service if there was the ad, or, you know, where the dispensary was that you could go to, but then you realize like, oh, what if this is a family? And like, what if the kid is at home and orders those? That's a big concern. And that is adding into why probably cannabis brands aren't doing as much large scale television data.
Well, especially with legalization where it is.
Mhm.
We've obviously made tremendous headway.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of new states that just came online. You know, New York for us,
Yep.
New Jersey, Connecticut, some of the other states in the Midwest. And that's gonna obviously help push the needle forward. And there's bills that are going through the House right now. There's actually a Republican bill that just came out, which is exciting. Because I think that tells us that there's a lot more people on board than we think, but until there is wider adoption across the board, it doesn't matter how many states are on board. It's going to always be an issue, because there's always going to be that federal issue that brands are afraid that somebody's going to come after them, that they're going to be the next Facebook or the next Google.
yeah. Well, and you know, it's definitely a double standard. Let's just take the legal market. And even let's take out broadcast television, right, which is FCC, federal, has an F in front of it. So cannabis, go away.
Terrestrial radio, and
Yeah, anything that's
TV are
but just a, you know, connected TV channel that you're delivering inside of a legal state, there's still, and we're talking about it now, this huge fear of like showing them cannabis branding on TV. I mean, there's just all kinds of ads of people pouring beers, right? Like it's fundamentally the same thing.
Also gambling.
And yeah, they got casinos and
FanDuel and DraftKings are all over everything.
Yeah.
And now BetMGM and every other one.
Oh, yeah.
What's the difference? Like, why can't the most interesting man in the world have cannabis product? Yeah, right.
Probably does.
Probably does.
When is that gonna be? When do you think the Super Bowl is gonna happen?
But yeah, that's a good question. What year will be the first cannabis Super Bowl?
I think it's coming. Not broadcast television. It'll be straight.
You think someone will like shortcut it with like a hemp
I
brand?
think so. I think
that is
so.
also cannabis?
Programmatic. So I know with some high level of what's the word? Certainty, yeah, that you can buy some of the networks where the Super Bowl is Super Bowl is aired, excuse me, programmatically, and they will take cannabis dollars. It's not all on the network, so it's obviously going to depend on what network has the Super Bowl that year. But I do think that someone will realize that and will advertise programmatically during the Super Bowl, and it will probably be one of the big MSOs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're doing it programmatically. It's not going to be the high price ticket. It's going to be, they hop the fence.
Which market is gonna
No, the Super Bowl this year? I don't know. Where is it?
I think it's Florida.
No, isn't it in LA?
No, it's LA, you're right. It's
And
LA,
so
which
far,
is also very interesting.
It's, okay,
Very
the plot
Yeah.
thickens.
Yeah,
The
so-
plot thickens.
It's actually funny that you reminded me that 'cause we earlier this year had looked at trying to figure out some kind of activation with our bus around the Super Bowl, some kind of distribution, trying to bring someone on board to try and tap into some of that media, even if it wasn't necessarily during the game, and it was pregame, postgame, or halftime show.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about LA, what also just happened there with another, unregulated, regulated, hot button industry. The Staples Center's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, no more.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, so.
Crypto, yes.
Yeah, so it really is only a matter of time, like the Super Bowl, obviously advertising is, the crown jewel of advertising we're talking about.
I wouldn't be surprised, to be completely honest, if it was the parent company. Just given, the ties to Jay-Z, how he likes to make a big splash. I know that they don't necessarily do a lot of forward-facing marketing, at least we haven't seen that yet. But it wouldn't shock me if that was something that they tried to pull.
It's good prediction.
Just throwing it out there, yeah.
And then like outside the box, we talked about display ads, we talked about banner ads, connected TV. What other innovative ways can you use programmatic advertising outlets?
Yeah, so there's, in console is growing, audio is
Console.
Gaming.
gaming,
Yeah.
Xbox, PlayStation,
So that would be just
streaming games, yeah. And a lot of that is in development. I've always thought that the next biggest market is to be able to insert programmatic ads in games like FIFA and Madden, like the actual ads in the stadium.
Rotate that ads, basically.
Oh, they do,
And
yeah,
I'm a big hockey fan, but every time I play NHL,
yeah.
I'm always looking at the ads like, oh, I can't wait to see something that's actually relevant to me. That'll be even cooler than the actual experience I'm already having.
Oh, and just think about it. You have, a Twitch streamer that's on there, he's sponsored by one of these, great cannabis brands. Yeah, and he's playing a game and he's streaming the game, and that advertiser roadblocked, as we said, that game that he's playing. So you see behind the net and the goal, like, yeah, there's
And
our
it makes sense with gaming too, right? 'Cause there's always been a synergy between gaming and cannabis.
It's the most captivated stream too. And there is always a synergy and it's, very similar consumers for, let's just say, the largest part of the industry, because I do think the cannabis industry needs to diversify. And a good example is like Icy Hot. You have Shaq, that's like all the ex-athlete, but then you also have, the baby boomer generation that would use it. But that's two different people on the, or the contextual scale that you're advertising to. Yeah.
All right, well, let's take another break here and we'll continue on and answer a few more questions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Go ahead. All right, well, let's continue the conversation on programmatic advertising and dive deep with a couple more questions here before we wrap up. You're saying that you wanted to look at the biggest kind of mistake that you've seen made. It's pretty common across the industry. Maybe one that you're most excited about.
Yeah. I think biggest mistake I see with programmatic or digital investment or display.
I like digital investment.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah, is not giving it a chance, letting the feeling of the unknown overtake its potential. It's something that you really have to give a chance to. And you have to try multiple things to figure out what works for your brand. So think about it as a way to collect and do trial and error, come with a hypothesis and put it out there, try it. But if you test with something little, like you said, $1,000, and you maybe did the wrong sale and you're back, like, I never want to do that again, it's too expensive. I guess, the mistake I see is living in fear for a brand that's new to it, because the education thing can be overwhelming. And one thing that I'm most excited for is to see the rise of cannabis content and that enabling brands brands and brand identity, and how that integrates, intertwines, and wraps around other verticals. And like to say, like rising tide lifts all ships, and that cannabis content, cannabis brands around, like I said, sports and gaming, just the sports industry, the fashion, beauty, and cosmetics industry, and how it can wrap around that, and hopefully that lifts it up. So excited for cannabis content and cannabis brands to build their identity from that.
I want to take your model, take that one step further, because it's literally the same thing I was going to say. And it's coming in with the idea and the number that you have in your head, and expecting to get that in return within minimal time before doing it next. As an example, an advertiser coming in and use that $1,000 minimum, $5,000 spend, not minimum, $10,000 spend, and expecting within 2 to 4 weeks to automatically get that return on investment. That same amount back in sales. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think there's, I'll build on that too, because I was going to say a similar thing. I feel like there is a tendency for marketers that are getting into digital, that have not done it before, to treat digital customers like this anonymous person is going to buy things. Like they're just ones and zeros, right? And I think it's important you should have a mindset that same person that you're going to serve an ad to, that's going to come to your site, landing page, your e-commerce, you should care about them the same way that you want your retail staff to care about customers who walk in the door. And so there is that same approach, like, oh, I'm going to spend X dollars, I'm going to buy sales because I'm going to do some numbers, and then we're going to buy something. But you need to have the same level of care and approach to that experience, even though they are online and you're not talking to them personally. They're still people, and they still care about the same things that your retail customers care about.
And you have to hit a consumer. There's various different studies that say this. The numbers change a little bit every year, but it's pretty much the same ballpark. A minimum of six times, maximum, but at least 10 times.
So it sounds like 10 and 20.
Yeah.
So it's coming down.
Maybe it changes every year. But the point is, you have to hit the consumer that many times before they take any action.
Yeah.
Any action. So that action might not necessarily be a sale. It might just be simple engagement, getting them to the website.
Yeah.
And then once they're on the website, you have to do even more to drive that conversion, remarket to them, make sure your website is easy to use, make sure you have good content on your website. Right. So, and at the end of the day, if I could really take $10,000 and get $10,000 back for any of my buyers, I wouldn't be sitting in this room right now. I'd have Mark Zuckerberg type of money.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be doing this. It's just not how it works.
No, I mean, our business, a lot of things in life, have like a mantra and everything. And like our business has one that's, this paradox, this problem, that we've been trying to solve as marketers. And it's when Wanamaker said, I know that half my advertising is working, I just don't know, or isn't working, I just don't know which half.
Right.
And we've been trying with technology and everything to solve that equation, and how to drive profit and revenue and sales for your company using marketing, and what works and what doesn't. And we're closing the gap. There's a lot of ways that we can close the gap, but it's never going to be perfect. It is never going to be perfect. And you come into it thinking that, I'm going to invest this much, I'm going to get that much out. And like, yes, you should plan, but also plan for the unexpected and learn. Like learn more about your consumer and the media that you're putting out there, test and try things. And yes, all of us sitting here on platforms and we want you to, spend money and be on those platforms, but we don't get anything out of working with the guy that's only going to give us, this little bit for this super heavy targeted thing. And personally, that's not like interesting to us. Like we are marketers ourselves. We want to work on big, fun campaigns that work for you. You said this, and I think it's so important, is that, I'm not working on the equipment. Like I want to build a long-term relationship. And I want to continue to work with it, because there's a sense of pride in it too. Like we all became marketers for that reason. And, you have to give ourselves a chance and you and your brand a chance to grow and to try and to test different things and get your product out there, because McDonald's and Coke and they've been doing that for years and years, and they still don't have it perfect.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of a pendulum swing that's happened from, which half is working, which half is not, and being kind of blind if you're just doing like a newspaper ad, right? Like it's hard to understand what's going on. And many people have gotten used to it as approachable is like Google Ads, right? Or you're doing CPC and paying for the sort of last click attribution things that you see a lot of e-com platforms and Instagram ads, where it's like, this is a direct response. We had someone buy something, and we see people getting into digital and only focusing on that part. And again, what we were talking about earlier, forgetting the middle of the buyer's journey and saying, okay, this one thing is making sales here. But that's a somewhat myopic view, right? Because you don't understand that there's a lot of other customers that you probably can capture that are going to require a little more care and attention on a longer time frame, right? I know for myself, there's products that I bought from Instagram ads, right? But it took like 6 months for me to finally see the ad enough times and be in the right mindset where I'm like, all right, I'll buy that thing that I'm not sure if I need, but it looks cool in that video.
Instagram ads work now.
They work, right? Yeah, but we have the same or similar ability with the tools today, right? With programmatic, we can serve video ads and we can follow consumers around in different contexts, but it requires a longer time period of thinking rather than just.
For sure.
I'm going to serve an ad, so I'm just going to click on it. They're going to buy something. Yes, some amount of people will do that, but that's not how you build brand equity. Really. Like if you want to become a brand, and eventually it's going to be a brand name, right? We're talking about it. We're talking about
this whole conversation. Yeah, that's a constant theme.
And who's the one leading, Kevin the race right now as far as brands in the cannabis space? That's global.
Yeah, not well. Like we're talking about
maybe
global.
national.
I would say that from a brand recognition perspective, probably cookies. And a lot of it has to do with the great job they've done with apparel.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a 24-year-old daughter, and like, her boyfriend comes over and wearing like a cookies hoodie, right?
Yeah.
And that was just kind of cool to see that when the first time that I saw that, it's like, that's the closest thing. But I've been beating this drum for years, which is there's no national brands. And we talked about this a little bit, and you brought up one that was perfect because I wouldn't have said select, right?
The select is it's purely, but to me, the only reason that people know them is because they're literally everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why. But outside of those two brands, and we're talking about it also because we're in cannabis.
Right.
Right. If you go
Thanks
to
for our listeners.
No, she doesn't.
and I leave that out.
Should have gone up here.
Yeah.
No, that's by the time she's trailed off.
But if you go to, I don't know, the middle of Manhattan somewhere, and you stop somebody who maybe they're walking down the street, you smell something, so you're like you're interested to do a poll.
Maybe someone who's actually using cannabis,
Yes,
right? So we know.
And you do the same thing on the West Coast, somewhere, let's say San Diego, maybe. They're just an everyday consumer. Most of them probably were a brand with.
Certainly not 3, and even between Northern California and Southern California, that's different also.
And the people that do and that are will probably name 3 different brands.
Yeah.
2 different brands.
Yeah.
3 different brands.
Yeah, the Venn diagrams will not line up.
Yeah, and Instagram, it works. You see the stories and the ads and everything, but it's programmatic is no longer it is engulfed all the rest of advertising, and it's on Instagram. It's still your ads are sent out to people that are similar than the ones that follow you. A lot of these brands you watch, they don't have a huge following. Maybe over 100, 200K. Like that's a lot, but they're constantly. And then you see them, and it's you see your friends, and it's like, oh, that would be, and then you go through, and it's like, oh yeah, this company, go through again. But it's almost more validating for the consumer when they see that brand on a different medium and somewhere else. It's they're getting bigger. They're getting bigger. They're outside of social, because I myself, yes, I'm in the business, so I understand, but when I see that, I'm like, they're still new, you know, they haven't taken off yet.
You're
And-
feeding into my narrative from earlier.
Yeah.
right? Which is, it's an always on approach.
Yeah.
It is something that you should always be finding to support everything else that you're doing. If you're not doing that, you don't have a well-rounded approach. And I think one of the other things that's, you know, interesting, another difficult thing that I've seen in my experience over the last few years, been trying to overcome is working with those smaller buyers, right, who don't have digital experience. And because they can't see it, because they don't fall into that target audience, and it's not a billboard, it's not an in-store display.
Yeah.
Doesn't work because they can't see it. And that's not the idea. The idea is, again, always on strategy that supports your at-home, that supports the print that you're doing, that supports the experiential, that supports any direct buys that you do with publishers, that supports gaming. Anything that you're doing, it should be always on.
Yeah, you need to build a actual brand relationship, right? And actually, we were talking about this today. We had a number of us, we all had whole hunches. Right?
Yeah.
Because, well, we tend to travel and go to conferences and they're comfortable and they're fine, right? They're decent, good.
Dress them
social
up,
dress
feet
them up.
down at the end of the day.
Wherever, yeah, you can wear it with jeans, you can wear it with a suit. I have like a strong brand affinity with that now because they have impacted my life in a way that's positive. And cannabis is uniquely positioned
To do that.
to really impact people beyond what shoes can do, right? Cannabis can change your life in different ways. And it is an amazing opportunity for people who want to build brands in this space to build real long-term brand.
We had somebody on last night and they were talking about the brand and they got so, you know, into the legality, they got so passionate about it. It was like, oh, we helped this one woman who was struggling from, you know, this and such a good story. And it's, you know, kind of like that's all we're in. And it's like, okay, great. Like, but that story should be always on. Like you want to continually tell that and you want to tell more and you want to keep telling different stories and you want to continually build, you know, what that brand is. But the always on a strategy too is take it to the next step is it's always on and speaking to different people at different times in different markets. Like Taco Bell has been advertising to stoners for forever. But they still advertise. Also, they have like their fresh tacos that are a little bit more, you know, sophisticated. Like, and that's, you know, for the mom was like, oh, I can't, you know, cook with a parent that's coming home, and it's like, oh, this is a healthier option. But they're still targeting to both.
For better or worse, right? It doesn't matter what your product is. I mean, I love the example. You're gonna laugh at this. I don't know if you guys all know the analogy, but Selena and bars.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
No,
Yeah. So there were injury attorneys in New York and like a jingle that was on. They played it every single day on every channel in New York City. Everybody knew who they were.
Yeah.
I like Dashers. Remember that? Did you ever have Dashers? There's like some radio ad. I don't even know if they're still around.
JG Wentworth.
Another one, yeah.
Yeah, another, yeah, or another, you know, one, Cars for Kids.
Guys for kids,
Okay.
yeah, that's it.
That's a
Well, I thought it was personal to me. I had a relationship.
Everybody knows who it is, though.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And they don't even, most people don't love the song, but they know what it is.
Yeah. You can't forget it. And so, but that always on strategy can mean a lot of different things, but take that step and say, okay, I'm gonna do this. And like, you will get return on it.
Yeah, trust in the process.
Yeah. Trust in the process.
It takes time. It does take time. And from my perspective, I personally think that you're not trusting the process unless you give it a minimum of 12 months. If it's not working for you after 12 months, okay, then maybe that platform and the people you're working with aren't doing something right, but you need to be patient. You'll probably start to see some kind of return after 3 to 6 months, but 12 months.
3 months is the very good. 90 days, you need to, your first 90 days for programmatic is about learning, right? And figuring out what works. And we mentioned there's tens of thousands of pubs. We have found real interesting anomalies we didn't expect in terms of pubs that sites I'd never even heard of, right? That just resonate for no reason in that market. And you can't predict it. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. We have predictions. I'm like, oh, we should do this target, but we also usually open some open prospecting to cast a wide net and learn.
Yeah, and that's where you're getting that information, but it's 12 months when you really have a lot of information and you can really start to take that data and that insight, make it happen.
Well, and this is taboo too, giving it a year. And the there'll be a lot of people that won't like this, and I know the specific area of people, but no, I'm gonna call them out. If it, after a year, it doesn't work, don't look at us first. Don't look at the platforms where you invested, look at your creative.
Creative.
Look at your website. Yeah, because like
Does
if
your
you're,
website
if you're
fit
out
in?
there and you're
Yes.
viewable and the numbers aren't adding up, like maybe your messaging isn't great. But don't give up on the process because you've gotten so much exposure. The market just decided, and for those reasons, we are out. Like you've seen a lot of good pitches, but
Yeah, and by the way, if it works for pretty much every other brand,
Yeah.
CPG, retail, entertainment, political
oh yeah,
now, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna work for you. So after a year, if it's not working, then it's probably not the platform. It's probably something with your creative, to your point, your website, or you're not getting clearly communicated to and getting a transparent buyer.
Yeah, we've
It's one of
definitely,
those things.
we've definitely seen campaigns, two companies selling fundamentally similar product, same market, same pubs. One of them getting a lot of sales, the other getting very, very little sales. Right? So, and that came down to even at the top of the funnel, like just the CTR. One of them was done, right? And that was just the creative, not even the post click. You get the post click where someone is actually in your buying experience.
What's the post click?
Post click, yeah. So, and I shouldn't even say click because it's mostly tap now, right? So post tap. Yeah, good point. Yeah. So you serve the impression, then someone clicks or taps on it, and they go. They leave our world and they go into the advertiser's world. And what does that world look like? Is it Willy Wonka or is it Clockwork Orange? Like what are we walking into? And we don't have any control over that thing. But we do help our advertisers and try to give them advice around having that narrative be continuous, right? That's the other thing you want to have. You don't want to serve someone an ad, and when they click through and go to a post-click experience, if it doesn't relate to what they clicked on, they're going to be disappointed or offended and leave, right? I like to use the analogy with display advertising banners as you're waving at someone, you're actually waving at a lot of people. And some of them, maybe 1%, if you're lucky, are going to wave back. And then that's where we say, okay, I want to introduce you to the brand. And then it's you. It's you.
We can only do so much.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I, at least from my perspective, that's what I try to educate my clients on.
yeah. I mean, look, you bring me the leads.
That's our job.
You have to close them. We give you a second chance with retargeting and preying on shoppers' guilt. They're like, I should have got those pants.
Yeah.
And I looked at them, and that's where you capture. CRM. Yeah, that's that whole market of once they're on your site, that process, that flow, the data that you capture, and also what you offer them, because that's a big concern for the cannabis industry is how do you build brand loyalty when you can't offer coupons and discounts, and because there's so many different dispensaries that your product might be in, and it's like trying to wrangle up and put
Some retail, it's pretty easy to do offers. We do a lot of that. Right?
Yeah.
Like first time shopper this or 30% off for this sale. But for the brand,
Yeah.
That's another problem that's unique to cannabis, which is that the brand, the connection between the brand and the retailer, it's hard to connect those pieces sometimes, right? So you want to advertise as a brand, but you actually can't sell things to consumers as a cannabis brand. Usually, like in California, there's D2C, direct to consumers is coming of age a little bit, but there's so much friction.
Yeah, and that data that you're collecting once they're on the site and you're getting their email address, they're signing up for discounts or the newsletter, and it's on the website. Like that data is like that shouldn't be two different departments at your company. No, they need to be the exact same, and you need to then use that after the let's say 6 months. You got all these people coming to the site, you got all this traffic, you're finding all this, and then analyze it, learn who all those people that came here, and you go, all right, who are people just like them, and then go back to the vast world of the ad marketplace and say, all right, let me go get the rest of the people that are like them or new markets. So in that 1 year, collect all of that and then continually use that, like build that
Finding that
stream.
strategy.
Yes,
Yeah.
continually finding that strategy.
Yeah, it never ends, yeah.
No.
It's an ongoing cycle, always have to optimize, always have to talk to these publishers.
Mhm.
Yep, improvements on the website, whatever it might be, get the conversion rate up. And, yeah, it's fun, keeps it interesting.
Yeah, I think we're wrapping up on time here, but
Yeah.
has this been the least amount of hosting you've had to do when you're ready? Like,
Yeah.
just ask like 3 ad tech geeks a question and just let them go way back. You won't even be able to get a word in. So,
No, well, I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
all right, cheers.
Sure.